Welcome back, everybody. Today, I'm joined again by Ambassador Sándor Kusai, who, among other positions, served as Hungary's top diplomat in China between 2008 and 2014. Sándor, welcome back.
Very nice meeting you again.
Glad having you, because I need to ask a diplomat, aren't we just witnessing the insane collapse of the diplomatic system and international law in front of our eyes? I mean, what's happening with Venezuela? And you just broke another horrible message to me that I wasn't even aware about. Can you tell us what it is?
The exact news of today, at least by the timing today, I think in the US it happened yesterday. So the issue is that Donald Trump, as president of the US, decided and issued an executive order for the United States to leave 35 different international organizations plus 31 international organizations within the United Nations system. So practically the US is leaving altogether 66 international organizations, a big chunk of which are the different organizations and funds and structures within the United Nations, including, for example, the United Nations Economic and Social Council. So even large and important parts of the UN system will be left alone by the United States, including stopping any funding from the US for these organizations all over the world. So I think it's very symptomatic. It shows very clearly that the global diplomatic institutionalized structure is collapsing and collapsing very fast. And furthermore, with the United States intrusion into Venezuela, it became very clear that the international law as such, the international legal system, is also collapsing very fast. So what we see now is really the end of the international system as we know it. And instead of that, we have the Wild West in the international relations.
This very pessimistic approach is like what I read in most of the media that I also actually I just agree. I mean, this is not the first time that the United States has invaded another country and even kidnapped its president. It has happened before. But the big difference is before they tried to put on the velvet glove of humanitarianism, they tried to cushion the words, they tried to create a framing, they tried to create a legal rationale and whatnot. And this time, nothing. It's just all out. And now the attack on the institutions that the United States itself built in order to manage international structures. I mean, in your lifetime and professional time as a diplomat, we have never seen a moment this blatantly attacking the very structure, the way diplomacy works, did we?
Yes, I fully agree with that. I have never seen such thing, such process coming out during my more than 40 years of dealing with international relations. Practically, on one hand, it's really very sad and makes me worry about the future of the whole international system. On the other hand, I have a little bit of feeling of satisfaction because for the last few years, not only me, but many analysts of international relations, we were talking about the upcoming imminent change of the world order of the international system. It was a result of technical or scientific analysis of the processes. And many people criticized us that we see very dark things which are not there. Everything is okay, especially in the European school of thinking, of analyzing, and in the European Union and the politicians. They always said that it is some kind of I don't know, some kind of bad analysis what we gave. Here are the proofs. And this process of collapse of the international law and the international system collapsing, this process reached, I think, a turning point. This turning point consists of few important events. The first one was the attack guided by the CIA against some Russian installment around Vladimir Putin's residency in Valdai. That is a new level. The US confirms that it was not the residence of the Russian president, but if something is 5 kilometers away, then it's practically the residence. You may sugarcoat it as you want, but it's the residence. Then came the aggression against Venezuela and the kidnapping of President Maduro. Then came just yesterday or the day before yesterday, the boarding of a Russian flagged ship on the high seas. And now we have the formal American decision to leave a big bunch of international organizations and defund them. So this is the new phase. It's a turning point altogether. Altogether, these events show a turning point which say that we are getting back to the late 19th century of power politics. Nothing else but brutal share power. And that means the end of the international law and system as we know it since 1945.
The UN system itself seems to be under attack now. Do you think the UN will remain for another year, like its headquarters in New York?
For another year, most probably. These processes are not very fast, but I think the UN is heading very fast to the same direction as the League of Nations ended up.
But
it's terrible, but it is happening. I don't know how long it takes. And I want to add one element. It is not only the responsibility of the great powers, first and foremost the United States, but it is also the responsibility of the mechanism of the United Nations, especially its Secretary General, Mr. Guterres. It is his responsibility as well, because during his management, the United Nations got paralyzed totally, could not solve any question, and less serves as a platform for debates even. So it is not only the great power politics, it's also I would say, the aging and paralysis of the international system, including the UN as such.
However, like Russia, China, and even the Europeans, at least pay lip service to the UN Charter. At the Charter, the Charter is still a holy cow. The Europeans, of course, don't live up to it, not at all. I mean, they do the opposite of it. But at least in words, they still refer to it, which the Trump administration also stopped doing. But all the others are still kind of saying, like, no, we want an international law world, especially Russia, China, the global South. Do you think that what we're seeing is the United States now actively fighting against this, or are we seeing them leaving and everybody else then just takes what's left and continues with it? I mean, you don't need to have that thing in New York. You could go back to Geneva. You could put it into Malaysia. You could put it anywhere, right? And continue with the procedural rules. What's your thought on that?
I don't think it is possible. I think, by the way, that the United States, for the policy of the Trump administration, which means the United States as such, the death of the UN or the international system is a collateral damage.
Not a goal, but collateral damage.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Trump administration tries to get rid of every factor, every institution, everything which seems to limit the freedom of action of the US as a power, as an international power. Economic power, ideological power, and political power and military power. And they try to get rid of everything which tries to limit their freedom of action. And the international system and the United Nations are only part of this, but the major aim and major policy is to inflict on the whole world, reinsert, if you want, the hegemony of the United States by all means available.
But why now?
Military. Yeah.
Why now? I mean, why not do that in 1999? It would be so much easier, right? Why did these institutions survive 30 years of unipolar moment and now they're dying, or now the United States is going on the frontal attack? Is it because like other powers came up and have now actually structural weight in this system, and the US has to get rid of the system if it cannot use it to project power?
Yes, I fully agree with you. That's the problem. In 1991, when the unipolar moment came, these structures, the international law, which was transformed by the US into the rule-based system, the rules are different than the law.
Yeah.
The rules were established by the US, and little bit of its allies, but less. They are less and less allies, more and more vassals. But that transformation has happened. What we have now is much more rules than international law. But since at least 4 or 5 years or more, the emergence of other powers, even such secondary powers by the US thinking, like India, because the US always calculated China, and for the last few decades, China and Russia as major powers, subordinate but major. But they never calculated India as a serious power. That's what we know. But even they got stronger, got better or larger influence in this international system of diplomacy, of policy making, and of international law. Even such a secondary power from the US point of view, like South Africa, could begin a very, very difficult legal process in the International Court of Justice about Gaza and the role of Israel, and so on. So it showed very clearly for the last few years that this system may work as a limitation on the American power. So the time has come now to get rid of it, because without playing within the framework of the rules established by the US, which have some connection to the international law, at least on some principle level. So it's very clear that this form of play does not serve the strategic goals of the US. I think nobody took it very seriously when a month ago the US published, the Trump administration published the new national security strategy. We read it, I also analyzed it, but we could not understand very well that it means the total turnaround in the American policy. In that nice diplomatic language, which at places are very brutal, the sentences what they use, but in that nice diplomatic language, it was not so clear that the attack is going on the whole system. And now it is very clear with the recent elements. The new Monroe Principle began with Venezuela. Please, Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, do prepare yourself because you are the next. And on the level of the Monroe Principle. But if you look further, you see how the preparation goes for a new attack against Iran. If you see how poor European colleagues of mine with some colonial past, we Hungarians did not have any colonial past, but they had. So Greenland.
Yeah.
It's the clearest thing. Greenland is the clearest thing that nothing is saint, nothing is fixed anymore. And it depends. It has two consequences very important. I am afraid that the United Nations and the whole international system goes for a total overhaul, not necessarily rescuable. I am the next year or 1.5 year, we'll make the decision. We will see whether the UN is rescuable or not. That's one element. And the second element, that this new policy, this new development opens up a lot of possibilities for the other great powers. And whether they use it, I mean in real political way, or they miss it, it will decide the longer term processes. Whether the situation get used by Russia to finish the Ukraine war on their terms as soon as possible, or by China to solve the issues of the South China Sea and Taiwan and others very fast, or if they play according to old rules, within 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, the United States will be strong enough again to force its will everywhere. So there is a window of opportunity for the other great powers. What the consequence may be is that it will be the final nail into the coffin of the international system if they use it. If they miss it, they will lose their great power position. So they face a very difficult choice.
As we know it, the international system, at the end, there will be a new system, there will be a new way of interacting, but the process of getting there tends to be extremely messy and, go through very much violence. International law is, of course, a way of structuring even violence, right?
Yes.
Is there, in your view, any kind of part of international law that you think that for whatever reason might be useful? I mean, after the Second World War, we actually renamed the law of war and we renamed it international humanitarian law. We just changed the label. But it would make sense to change it back again, say like, no, we have a law of war. And once there's war, I mean, here are the rules of engagement. And these rules are just as good for the United States because they help you. They help you to get you back your soldiers. They help you that your soldiers are not going to be that hurt that much. On the other hand, again, the United States today doesn't fight like that anymore. I mean, are we witnessing really like even a departure from the way that the great powers interacted even in the 19th century with each other?
Yeah. I am a very optimistic person.
Please.
Which means I am a very, very well-informed pessimist. Which means practically that on the optimistic part is that I am convinced that the specialists in international law and the diplomats are clever enough and are creative enough to construct a new structure for international law, and they will find nice new names for their constructions. Like it was the League of Nations, it failed. Then we decided United Nations. It's much nicer than the League of Nations. But the substance is that we go back to in content, we go back to the end of the 19th century structure of open power grab by great powers. With a big difference, it will be on a much higher level. At that time, it was only the European great powers, you plus the US and Japan, who competed for influence, and all the rest of the world were not a subject of this action but the object of their colonization. Today, under the present circumstances, the present development of technology, war technology and everything, we have much more players. We have some major players from the south, from it's India, to some extent in Brazil and Indonesia, which is always forgotten in Europe, but it's a serious country, and so on. So most probably we will have a much more complex power game, and as a result of it, we will have a much more complex international system and system of international law in the future. But it will need years to be created. So it's not so simple. And we are now in the very difficult years of this process with many wars. If you see that, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, the European coalition of the willing decided to establish military bases in Ukraine after the ceasefire. So everybody is building up its country, its position for military confrontation. This time it's in Europe and in other parts of the world.
But we are now in the situation where the only outspoken, like declared threat to European EU territory comes from the ally in the West, not from the adversary in the East, right? Russia not a single time has said, I want a piece of the European Union. Donald Trump now made it clear, you either give it or we're going to go and take it. What do you want to do? How long do you think it will take for the Europeans to kind of, they've been now hit in the face so many times, but they're still saying like, please more, don't leave. How long do you think this will still go on?
Endlessly.
Are they that
I
deep
think,
in there? That deep? It's like,
yeah, endlessly. I am convinced that the European political elite, the decision makers, both in the major countries who count, because, sorry, nobody takes seriously Denmark with its population of 5 million. Nobody. The issue about Greenland is the French president's statement that he will send the French Navy to save it, to defend it, which is, by the way, a joke, of course. We understand it. But so the European great powers, political elite, and the European integrations political elite, Madame Ursula von der Leyen and her team, they are simply incapable of adjusting to this new process. They don't have a real picture of the facts. They don't have any understanding what is going on. So they continue to behave within the same pattern like 10, 15 years ago. It's totally out of context, and I don't think they are capable of learning. They are like the Bourbons in France. they never learned. That's what is happening.
But in terms of alliance dynamics, in a sense, this is not even new, right? I mean, alliances are not just targeted toward the outside. Your country, Hungary, in 1956 was invaded by its very own alliance, by the Warsaw Pact, right? I mean, alliances are also there in order for the top dog to just order its minions. And the question is, how long will it take the minions to understand that this is not a very beneficial way for them to do things? But then again, if you pay off the top elite, which is what the transatlantic system is doing, they will go along for a long time, right? So the Europeans will probably, this will probably continue, right, for the next couple of years.
It will continue until the European societies wake up and change their leadership. But it's a very difficult and long process, especially in our present democratic system. You must build up a majority not only in the population, but also according to different election rules. You must transform it into political majority, which is not so easy. We saw it in quite a few countries, that either the big chunk or the majority of the population wants a change in policy, but the political mechanisms works that way that they cannot insert their will on the political level. So it will take a long time. Maybe even it needs some real conflict. So to be a little bit cynical, I hope very much that the Trump administration begins its action, whatever action they want to implement in Greenland as soon as possible. It will be a final kick for the present European attitude towards its major ally, the main ally, because that will brighten up all the minds of the Europeans. They still believe in illusions about their alliance with the US. So some radical action we need to make it clear. I know that it sounds cynical, but I hope that this will happen. The sooner it happens, the better for Europe long-term perspectives.
I I'm absolutely certain once the United States invades Greenland and puts its soldiers there, that Mark Rutte will explain to us that this is just an administrative change in stationing policy.
Within the alliance,
within the alliance, everything is fine. We're fine. It's the disagreement on the margins on how the management should happen. It's a technicality, but the thing I really don't. I wonder if you can explain to us, how does it happen that within the European Union, even though we have these 27 member states, which on paper should all have, more or less equal say in what is happening and unique consensus and whatnot, although majority decisions, of course, carry forward. But we have now the situation where we have the sanctions mechanisms that are used as a foreign policy tool that are now being turned inward in order to take down dissent inside the European Union. How is it possible that even a country like Hungary and Slovakia and so on, who have been extremely critical and who said several times we are not on board with that, in the end, it's a 27 member state decision to do that? How does the political process work in order to coerce everybody into agreeing to these things?
I think, as far as I know, it's a very sophisticated system of partial deals and coercion on many fields of activity. So some coercion on investment rules, some coercion on legal procedures, some coercion or in other fields, in technical fields, in environmental protection fields. So it's a very complex integration, and every part of it can be used as a tool to pressure one or two or a few countries to give up their position, or at least to retreat on their position on other issues. So it's a very complex structure, which is practically, I would say, unmanageable from the point of view of implementing national interests, because so many interaction. It's a web, and if you are a fly and fall into the web of the your enemy, then you cannot get free of it. That's the same situation goes with in the present situation. And I want to add one more thing. I think this structure will be kept intact as long as they are capable. Not only Mr. Rutte will say that it's just a technicality. The same we will hear from Kaja Kallas. It's a technicality. Nothing changed. But the problem and the big issue with that it is inherently in the structure of the European Union. It's a bad structure, and all the structural dysfunctions come out on the surface now, and we cannot manage it.
I mean, I like your metaphor of the web, to explain how the different knots are caught in there. But the sick thing is that although it is a spider's web, there are spiders that are able to move like very freely on this web and actually impose very strongly. Spider Ursula, Spider Kaya, Callas. There's a couple of kingpins really that are able then to use this web very very skillfully. How is that one possible? I mean, because in theory they should also be like in the dependency structures, but it seems that some are more equal than others.
It shows very clearly that the equality of sovereign states is a lie. There are more equals, if you want, and the system works for the benefit of those more equals. For temporarily with an organization, temporarily with some rules, like the requirement of unanimity or veto power, if you want to say that way, you may temporarily create an outside look that it is really
fair.
Yes, that it is really a union of equals, but it is not. That's the reality. So at least after a few decades, it is becoming now very clear. And furthermore, I think it's very important to understand that not only the general global international structure is in very big crisis now, the similar goes on in the very European Union as such, because it is a union, it is an integration of group of countries, 27 of them, which have very clearly different national interests. Excuse me, what is the common interest of Portugal and Finland? Think about it. So we created a mechanism which seemingly can coordinate the national interests of all the countries. And the bigger the crisis, the higher the tension. These differences of national interests become clearer and clearer. Just one example to understand it. If you look Spain's stance on the Venezuelan issue, compare it to, let's say, Hungary's or Estonia's, or you will see that there are fundamental differences in approaches to Latin America. Spain, which has a historical colonial past, but very active present interaction with Latin America, its position with regard to Venezuela is totally different. They signed the same statement like Brazil and Colombia and other countries. The single country which signed that statement from the European Union is Spain. So the construct is bad. Nobody can help it, but it's very clearly it's bad because the construct serves the interest of the large European companies. It's the transnational companies of Europe, the banks and some large companies, which use the European Union as the mechanism of their implementing of their interests. That's it.
I was about to ask that. So whose union is it? And maybe not whose country, but
It's the
running using it. Who because the European Union by now is a toolbox with a lot of tools, but who's using the tools? And we know
it's the international capital. That's it.
what will this?
That's so simple.
What does this do? What does this do to the global structure? Because the others, Brazil, Mexico, Ecuador, but also in all of Southeast Asia, the African nations, they all see this, and they see it much more clearly than, for instance, the Europeans see it. What does this do now? Every reaction creates a counter reaction, and I wonder, I mean, if you need to use violence on that scale against Venezuela, that's not a sign of strength. It's actually a sign of weakness once you have to go there.
Yeah.
And so where are we?
In the process, we are I think in the middle of the process of every serious country waking up, and the political leaders begin to redefine their national interests and redefine their capacities. And as a second step, they will redefine their alliances, economic cooperations, and so on. It will come, and it will come very fast. If you are, let's say, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, you will think very seriously, because Malaysia is not a very big country. In European terms, it would be a big country, but in Southeast Asian terms, the population is not very big. And you may serve as a simple example to show the world that US can control Southeast Asia as well. So the policy making, the choice of alliances, the strategy for building up and strengthening the ASEAN, going further than the simple forum of diplomacy, but build up much more. It will come very fast, I am convinced.
The problem we're in now is, like, within my own studies, neutrals are always secondary targets of attack, because they're also not on board, right? Primary targets are the enemy states, but secondary targets are the neutrals, because they're also not on board. And we see how the United States is currently cracking down against anyone and anything that tries to remain, in between, or try to have connections with everybody, right? This is now going to happen. The coalescing around the poles. Although the Russians and the Chinese very much resist that, they do not do this pole building. But the pressure on the neutrals is going to be huge for going forward. How do you think they will deal with that? And by neutrals, I mean places like Malaysia, Indonesia. Let's say, well, Mongolia is a little bit outside of that, but those states that are actively trying to have a multi-vector relationship with everybody.
They will try to continue this multi-vector policy for the time being, but they will be forced to choose sides.
They will resist that as much as possible. But
they will try to avoid it, but they will be forced by the logic of the events to choose side. Which country earlier recognizes it and begins to build up its own system or web of international connections in the breaking up world, those countries will be more successful. Which do it later, they will be more the object of the events.
So do you think BRICS is actually a way for certain states to try to rescue themselves into a web of, or into a different, not a web like the EU, like but a interconnection that is not European based? Or because I also have interpret the attack on Venezuela as an attack on BRICS as well, and the preparation on attacking Iran is an attack of breaking the belief that an alternative structure is possible.
Yes, I think in wider context, the American. That's why I told you that the U.S. policy at present is about pushing the supremacy of the U.S.
Mm.
in the Western Hemisphere, and if the other great powers do not take action in their own region of influence, then later there as well. And breaking the other element is breaking the BRICS one by one.
Yeah, picking them up.
And if the BRICS countries do not recognize it and don't increase their cooperation qualitatively and quantitatively, then they will lose. That's for sure. And the main purpose is breaking the BRICS one by one. And that's why I told you that the United Nations, the international system, is just a collateral damage, which makes it very suitable for the US to break if it is damaged, if the international system, the international law is dying, it makes even more possibilities for the US to break the BRICS. By the way, breaking first or in the way of breaking the BRICS and the structure, they break their own allies. They really turn them into full vassals. Beginning, by the way, it began already, this process. After all, Finland, it is not a neutral state anymore. Sweden is not a neutral state. I don't know how long Austria can remain. Switzerland has a little bit better chances, but those
Not
are
very
also
good
very
anymore.
limited.
Yeah.
If you remember the history of the Napoleonic Wars, Switzerland was not neutral at that time.
Well, it was taken. It was occupied.
That's it. So
Yeah,
that's what we're talking about. So I agree with you that the US tries to break, or that's the logic, that they try to break the neutral states. But the neutral states, especially if they are not embedded like Switzerland within the NATO and the EU, but if they are in other parts of the world, they have the possibility for some countermeasures and counterplays. But if they miss the window of opportunity, they will suffer as well.
yeah, but it's an even more difficult game, because the moment these countries start building military alliances, you actually lose structurally, because you just go into the confrontation, right? You then go into the polarization. So the only chance BRICS has at getting out of this without then going into the war logic is by refusing to polarize while still building up the network, and just say, like, we build it up until we can invite everybody to join us, right? But without becoming an adversary. But that is an incredibly difficult feat to do.
Look, it's in diplomacy, in international relations, I am convinced that the most difficult thing always is to go through a very narrow path. That requires the most talent, the genius of a good diplomat, to bring your country or your structure through a very narrow path between the very difficult and bad choices. That is what must be practiced by many countries in the world, and talented leaders may do it, less talented will fail. That's the system what we are in. And of course, some great powers like the Chinese, the Russians and the Indians and the Brazilians, always talk about preserving the UN, the Charter, as you mentioned, and so on. It may be useful as a tactical tool, this position, for a certain time. But if the international structure is principally broken,
Yeah.
this narrative becomes counterproductive. And that's where we are now. I think soon either the other powers change their narrative, their concept, for rebuilding the international relations instead of safeguarding the system. If they don't change it, they will lose. That's the strategical logic.
Who would have thought? Who would have thought that in the second day of 2026 we have to say goodbye to the international structure as we knew it?
You know, from my point of view, it's an emotional goodbye. I don't like this process, but that's how reality works. Nothing, you know, whatever was born will
Must
die.
die.
That's a certainty. That's what we have in the case of the present international system. The UN may be renamed or some other structure. So, but as such, as it was established in 1945, it is dying now. It's lived its life, 80 years. Sorry, guys, that's it.
Yeah, it was a good. It wasn't all bad in these 80 years, so it kind of served the purpose. Okay, Sándor, in that case, that means everything's up for grabs. Who has the best idea for the next system? We will certainly talk again. Anything that we didn't mention yet that you think is really important?
No, I think we talked all the nice and less nice things, what is going on. And I hope that all your viewers and other guests will all develop these ideas, because it's very difficult to analyze and to get conclusions at the present level.
Yes.
We must free, as Deng Xiaoping said, we must free up our thinking and get new ideas. That's the way how we shall act, and we will make mistakes. Yes, in our analysis as well.
Yep.
Because it's the time when nothing is clear, nothing is final. So I would suggest to everybody, so to all your viewers, to free up their thinking, try new concepts, think new analysis, because the old ways are over.
And the funny thing is, in 2055, historians will say that, it was clear that 2035 would look like this because in 2026 X happened. They will tell you it is absolutely clear. We just, poor fools, we can't see it yet.
Yeah.
Sándor Kusai, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much for your invitation and attention.